One night, a young woman named Iris, unable to sleep, heads to the kitchen, takes a pocket knife, gets into her car, and drives away from home. She travels a long way along a forest road, occasionally glancing at a toy boat she brought with her. Finally, she arrives at a secluded park and reaches a cliffside. Iris climbs one of the cliffs and approaches a small memorial set up in memory of a child who died at this place. She weeps over his photograph and then walks toward the edge of the cliff. It becomes clear that Iris has decided to end her life and is summoning the courage to take a step into the void. Suddenly, a man appears nearby, sits down close, and introduces himself as Richard. He starts asking her about the tragedy, explaining that he came here to be alone and wants her to listen to him. Richard tells her that he had a car and a beloved girlfriend, Chloe, but one day he crashed the car, smashing it into a brick wall. The worst part was that they had argued just before Chloe died. Involuntarily, Iris starts listening to him and even offers words of sympathy, to which Richard only scowls, saying everyone around him said the same thing. After the accident, he was paralyzed for almost 3 months, living with the help of machines, and all his visitors irritated him with their sympathy. After hearing him out, Iris suddenly shares that her husband had carved their names into a tree while their son was searching for sticks to roast marshmallows. Meanwhile, she was gathering flowers and didn't see their son fall from a height. Now she doesn't understand how to live anymore. It's as if she's broken. Richard suddenly says that being broken doesn't mean being hopeless, and he stands up, preparing to leave. Unexpectedly, Iris realizes she no longer wants to jump and follows him down the trail toward the cars they had left at the park's entrance. But when she tries to get into her own car, it turns out that Richard has parked too close, blocking her in. Only then, as if realizing it himself, he walks around her car and suddenly knocks her out with a stun gun. She regains consciousness, bound in the back seat of Richard's car. Panic overtakes her, and upon hearing her quickened breathing, Richard realizes she's awake. Iris attempts to call for help using her watch, but he informs her that there's no signal in this remote area. She has no hope of her husband finding her quickly either. Richard mocks her attempts to persuade him to release her, placing her son's toy boat, taken from her car, in front of her. This reminds Iris of her pocket knife. She cautiously pulls it from her back pocket, opens it, and begins to cut her bonds. To keep Richard from hearing, she starts a conversation about his family, but he shifts the topic to her deceased son, forcing her to continue talking. However, Richard doesn't fall for her tricks, stating his intention to take her to his cabin in the woods, where he plans to braid her hair. But as she frees herself, Iris crushes these dreams with a stab. The blow only grazes him, and uninjured, Richard loses control of the car, crashing it into a tree and hitting his head. He tries to restrain Iris, but she fights back desperately. Eventually, they both spill out of the car on opposite sides. Iris cuts the ropes on her feet, jumps up, and tries to find help, but the road is deserted. Richard also stands up, lamenting that she spoiled such a perfect opportunity. Everything was going according to plan. Solitude, no witnesses, an empty road. But he foolishly didn't check her pockets, for which he's now paying the price. Oddly, he remarks that she wanted to end her life anyway, and by the way, she should already be feeling the first symptoms. With these words, Richard shows her an empty syringe. He explains he took precautions and injected her with something that will soon make it impossible for her to move or speak. Her body will no longer serve her, giving him complete control. In 20 minutes, she'll lose fine motor control in her hands. Then she won't be able to hold a knife or walk, so she might as well go with him. Richard invitingly extends his hand, but Iris runs into the forest. She loses her knife but still manages to run, though her fingers are becoming less responsive. She checks her watch to track time, recalls counting exercises with her son, and realizes her dexterity is deteriorating. Richard's voice calls out as he catches up to her. Iris keeps running, but her body grows increasingly numb. Eventually, she realizes she'll soon be unable to move. She crawls along a stream bed and finds a hollow under tree roots, hiding inside. Just then, she hears Richard's voice, tauntingly calling for her as he searches. When it seems he's lost her, Iris realizes she's lying on an anthill. Insects crawl onto her face and she can't bear it, rolling out of the hollow. Richard hears her cry and returns to the stream, but she scrambles toward the water and throws herself into the river, which sweeps her away. Richard sees this and yells that she won't be able to swim, but she somehow stays afloat, eventually making it to shore, where her body fully loses movement. She lies in a meadow, realizing she can no longer do anything. Suddenly, she spots a structure nearby. Soon, an older but sturdy man approaches her on a lawnmower. He examines her, realizes her eyes are alert, and immediately understands that she can communicate by blinking. Once for yes, twice for no. Iris signals that she isn't injured but needs help. The man heads off to fetch a wheelbarrow, and lying on the grass, Iris suddenly notices the beauty around her. The sun, the clear sky with the fading trail of an airplane, the greenery in the peace. When he returns, the man moves her to his cabin to call for help, but he doesn't get the chance as someone knocks on the door. The old man turns to the entrance, noticing Iris blinking frantically. He opens the door to find Richard outside, looking desperate and begging for help finding his wife, who he says was injured in an accident. The man asks him to wait outside, intending to fetch the phone, but Richard enters, despite his pleas. Richard complains of feeling unwell and asks to sit on the couch, but he also scans the room, noticing the wheelbarrow but not finding Iris. The old man asks him once again to leave and wait outside, promising assistance but on his terms. Richard claims he lost his phone in the accident, so the man offers to bring his phone outside for him. He plans to inform the rescuers that someone has broken into his house. At this, Richard breaks down, and the man, feeling pity, asks what truly happened. Richard claims his wife is mentally ill, that he protects her as best he can, and fears she'll be institutionalized if the police find her this time. He says he loves her dearly and blames himself for allowing her to drive, which she wanted so badly. However, he supposedly lost his temper over one of her maneuvers, causing her to lose control and crash. He fainted, and when he regained consciousness, she was gone. He fears she might go catatonic and be unable to move or speak. As Richard talks about his love, the man glances at Iris, lying under the couch, unsure who's truly in danger. Seeing Richard's desperate expression, the man recalls his own wife, who often fussed over his health at the expense of her own, ultimately ignoring her own symptoms and leaving him alone. He decides to tell the truth, even admitting he hasn't been entirely honest. But then Richard's phone rings, revealing his deceit. The man once again demands he leave. Dropping his pretense, Richard asks why the man's wheelbarrow is in the kitchen. The old man admits he indeed found a woman and hid her in his shed, asking them both to leave and promising to forget the incident. Richard goes toward the shed, first snatching the man's phone. The old man pretends to comply, but then shoves him. Richard falls and a cabinet topples onto him, allowing the man to grab his phone and dial emergency services. But Richard attacks him, and they struggle, ending with the old man victorious. Richard finds a knife, though, and stabs him. Iris watches the old man die, helpless. Meanwhile, Richard retrieves a gasoline canister from the shed and begins dousing the furniture. Just then, Iris manages to tap a finger on the floor. Richard sets the house ablaze and steps outside as Iris reaches a blind cord. Now seated in the old man's truck, Richard notices the blinds moving and realizes where Iris is hidden. He pulls her from the burning house, placing her in the truck's front seat. As they drive away, he berates her for making him kill the old man. He'd never killed a man before. Unexpectedly, his phone rings. He puts it on speaker, and Iris hears his daughter's voice, announcing that she and her mom are coming up to the cabin in the mountains since he's been leaving too often, and they miss him. Richard feigns excitement and asks them to bring everything for a picnic, though Iris notices how enraged he seems, nearly causing an accident with an oncoming bus. Later, Richard realizes they're low on gas and has to stop at a station. Nearby, an ambulance rushes by, and smoke rises over the hill where the old man's house burned. Richard places a cap on Iris's head and leaves to pay for the gas. Iris tries to signal for help, but her body won't fully cooperate. Still, she manages to unfasten her seatbelt, turn toward the window, and drop the cap from her head. Suddenly, a child's face appears at the window, staring intently at her. Before Iris can make any noticeable sign, Richard reappears, and the boy's mother arrives, sensing something is wrong, but unable to pinpoint it. She takes the boy away but glances back at Iris several times. Richard gets back in, floors the gas, and they soon arrive at the site of his original crash, where his damaged car still stands. Richard changes into new clothes and begins repairing his car. Meanwhile, Iris's fingers are slowly regaining movement. She flexes them just as a highway patrol car pulls up nearby. A concerned woman from the gas station had called, describing a vehicle matching Richard's license plate. Richard attempts to dismiss the officer's questions, but it's clear the officer is suspicious. Noticing a strange truck in Richard's bruised face, the officer grows wary. In that moment, Iris manages to crack the window slightly, prompting the officer to take a closer look. Richard tries to pass Iris off as his wife, a woman deeply affected by the loss of their child, who's now struggling with alcohol. He uses her son's real name and recounts the actual story of the boy's death, causing Iris to tear up. Seeing her distress, the officer almost believes Richard's story, but Iris manages to whisper, "Help," and the sight of zip ties and a filled syringe in the truck convinces the officer that something illegal is happening. He reaches for his weapon, but Richard strikes first, hitting him with a metal chain, then beating him to death. He loads the officer's body into the patrol car and sets it on fire. Driving away from the scene, Richard blames Iris for the officer's death, claiming it's all her fault. Now able to speak, Iris retorts, saying that his mental state is to blame. She recalls his story about the hospital and hints that his mind fractured back then. Richard pulls the vehicle over and explains that when he saw his girlfriend's broken neck, he gained a sense of clarity, realizing his purpose. He thanks her death for granting him this mission from God. Iris reminds him of his family, pointing out how much he loves them and reasons that this has to end. She proposes he just let her go. She knows nothing about his true identity or background, which means he won't be caught. But Richard changes course, taking her to a nearby lake. He stops at the shore, and Iris manages to grab a syringe, even pricking his leg with it, but she lacks the strength to push the plunger. Richard laughs at her weakened state, and Iris suddenly recalls that earlier that morning, she had wanted to die. He grabs a knife, places her in a rowboat, gets in himself, and rows to the center of the lake. Realizing the end is near, Iris starts crying and asks Richard to retrieve her son's toy boat from her pocket. As he does, she seizes his knife and stabs him in the neck. He pulls out the knife and reaches for a gun, but she pushes him overboard. Richard struggles to climb back into the boat, but Iris grabs the gun and fires at him, causing him to disappear beneath the water. Exhausted, Iris collapses at the bottom of the boat, watching as bloodstains mar the water's surface. Suddenly, the boat starts to fill with water from bullet holes in its sides. She is pulled down into the depths, still bound. The toy boat her son treasured floats peacefully on the lake's surface, just as Iris emerges at the shore, exhausted and alive. After catching her breath, she notices Richard, still alive, lying nearby. She approaches him and, surprisingly, thanks her would-be killer. A budget-friendly horror story from the damsel in distress genre, crafted with familiar plot twists. A measured and well-acted thriller, though it could benefit from more bloody moments and slightly fewer dialogues, though that's a matter of taste.